well. Sorry. I automatically thought it was on. That's a very good start, isn't it? So I'll start again. Thank you for everybody for coming today to this session on FinTech, AI and digital infrastructure. My name is Stuart Thompson, so I'm the moderator for the panel. We've got a fantastic lineup. Rather than me introducing them all, I'm going to let them introduce themselves and say a few opening remarks. But I suppose just to set the scene, FinTech, AI and digital infrastructure now play a decisive role in the transformation of economies. Far beyond mere technological innovation, they're changing and shaping nations' competitiveness, enabling the fluidity of exchanges and strengthening the ability of states to control their own development tools. So in this context, digital sovereignty has become the major strategic issue. It reflects a country's capacity to control its data, critical networks, and financial systems in an increasingly interconnected global environment. So they're just some of the themes that we'll be able to explore with this expert panel with us today. So what I'll do is I'll sort of say which speaker will speak first, and then they'll do their sort of couple of moments. But I would encourage all of you to get your questions ready, because the idea is that we'll try and make this as interactive as possible. So have your questions ready. I'll come back to the audience once everybody's had their chance to have the panel have had their chance to have a say. And we've also had a few questions in via the app as well. So I'll try and be particularly technologically friendly, and I will ask them as well. When I introduce people, do forgive my complete and utter London accent here as well, and I beg the forgiveness of the panelists as we start for the session. So anyway, look, can we start with Ismail Belahat? Your comments and thoughts and introduction.
Yes. Yeah, indeed, your accent from London is much more difficult to understand for us Moroccan than my loosey Moroccan French accent. I hope everybody will understand me clearly. So I'm quite happy to be here today because FinTech in Morocco is at the beginning of something. We've been unfortunately far behind a few African countries that have created so many fintechs that have become, for some of them, unicorns. I'm speaking of M-Pesa in Kenya, of Fawri in Egypt, with the local government that has helped in the creation of the ecosystem. And we can see that when you analyze the fundraisings of these startups, you see that unfortunately Morocco is still quite behind. However, now that I have said this, I'm pleased to announce that it's been now around a year that the Central Bank of Morocco has created what we call the Morocco FinTech Center, with whom I was actually this morning, which role is to help any kind of startup to navigate the fintech, the Moroccan fintech environment, and especially when it comes to regulation. As you know, it's an industry that is heavily regulated for obvious reasons. And if you don't get helped, it's quite difficult for a startup to go through everything. So what they've decided to do is to organize twice a year a fintech acceleration program with the University Mohammed VI Polytechnic, in which they select a cohort of some of the best entrepreneurs in Morocco and help them, again, navigate the system, and for some of them get potentially licenses. So, yeah, I think it's the beginning of something. The fact that today there is such a panel with amazing people around the table to discuss it is a good sign that we are at the very beginning of the story. And this is why, and I will conclude with this, this is why the company I represent, that is a financial institution called Shari, and that got a license from the Central Bank of Morocco in order to do financial inclusion and help the small retailers with the usage of digital tools and digital payments, we've made the decision to take all of our infrastructure, which is all the technology we've developed, so the core banking system, the integrations with Visa, with the national switch, with the central bank, and we've decided to open everything through a public documentation, a public API, and a public sandbox that anyone who wants to build his or her own embedded fintech use case can use our APIs, and in less than a month start a fintech in Morocco with wallet as a services, with KYC as a services, with bank transfers as a services, and so on. So I think that initiatives like this one will help Morocco build more and more fintechs, and I still believe that fintechs should be at the center of the tech industry, because any company, any startups to survive needs to charge its clients, and for that needs embedded fintech.
Thank you. Thank you for setting the scene so eloquently there as well. We'll come back on probably a couple of issues around transparency, but we'll pick up with the other speakers first. So Hiranda Misra, you're next.
Thank you, and I'm okay with your London accent, Stuart. Given I just flew from there yesterday with you on the same flight, by coincidence. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Hiranda Misra. I'm the chairman and CEO of a company called GMEX Group, and its commodities fintech subsidiary 013. What do we do? And I'll relate that to the context of this topic. I mean, we enable digital infrastructure at the intersection of traditional finance and digital finance. So everything from traditional money to newer stable coins. And we allow platform distribution and asset monetization and provide yield to investors. Now, what does that mean in terms of the topic and in terms of sovereign governments and also companies? I mean, I would argue data is key here, and whether it's a sovereign country like Morocco, it must control its data, it must control its digital rails, and ultimately it must control its economic destiny. But whether it's a company or a country, it's got to do that in a way that is interoperable and open. And we'll discuss some of those themes and practical examples of that when I get to talk, but I'll allow the other speakers to introduce themselves, and back to Stuart.
Brilliant, thank you, Renda. Jeffrey Levine. Jeffrey.
Thank you. I'm going to move this a little bit closer. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm in this room in the capacity as an advisor for Her Excellency Maggie Gu and the Tomorrow Foundation. My background is I've just retired from NVIDIA, AI chip manufacturer, who's actually a platform company, in March. I spent 10 years, started there in 2016, and the last hat I was wearing was what we call Sovereign AI. So our AI Nations Global Public Sector team, where we were bringing AI scalable across governments. In that capacity, I've worked to help bridge the digital divide, bringing in compute infrastructure throughout Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia. And that's why I'm part of the Tomorrow Foundation as an advisor. But I do wear a couple of other hats. I'm also a partner in a family office fund that is it's a family office fund that invests for multi-billion-dollar family offices. And it's a portfolio that's global, but the part of that is to help unlock these infrastructure resources to help scale up AI infrastructure. I also am a CEO and founder of a company that's being announced called Frontier Signal Partners, which is a group of NVIDIA alumni primarily who are kind of working together to help advance the mission. And so there's alumni who are coming on as advisors. And also next month I'm starting a position at MIT as an applied engineer for the Laboratory Information Decision Systems. So that's a little bit of my background. And for this room here, I think something that's, when I think of AI, especially in constrained areas, in the global south, it's more important than ever to scale up and scale out. And scaling up is the hardest thing to do. So, it's just some ideas of where you have to start from first principles, is understanding physically where are you in the world and what are your constraints and what are your assets. You have to, find what your assets are, and you have to have policy that makes them bankable, right? So you need energy, you need land, you need water, you need fiber. But you also have policy, if the policy is not, is preventing you from scaling up, which happens in Europe quite often, you're kind of incapacitated. So you have to understand your assets, make them bankable. And then from there, you have to plan your offtake. And this is a hard part. There's plenty of people have the right assets, and sometimes they're bankable. But if you don't have the offtake correct, then your investment's not going to go anywhere. And I think in this room here, we're looking at AI natives. The application layer is the off-takers that you want in a nation. And that depends on developers, but AI is here, right? So there's something where, in the past, we're dependent upon computer scientists and developers, but we're now in a place in the world where you can have someone who might even be illiterate, but if they have this device and you have an LLM that's steered to speak in their dialect, their mother tongue, you can have a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old that can find their way out of poverty. So that's interesting. You can start with very small data centers for inference just to make a modest amount of tokens. It's just how do you distribute those tokens. So that offtake, right now I see a lot of offtake is, okay, we're going to have a large company from China or from America that's going to come in and be our offtaker. That's okay, but that's not sovereign. Sovereignty means that it's local data and local infrastructure. So you have to start with the enterprise. The small, medium companies have to depend on this, but if enterprise are typically not compute users. So how do you work to have the enterprises start dogfooding it? How they become off-takers, because you find the enterprises are usually the ones who own the energy, the land, and the water rights. So if they don't understand it firsthand, how are they speaking to the government ministries to lobby for the correct policy to help them in their work? So that's ultimately the flywheel, is that you have to really start at the beginning understanding your constraints. And even if you look at America, right, it's if you break it apart by the states, most states really do not have the infrastructure. You're dependent upon Northern Virginia and Texas and a couple of other states in the Midwest. And I look at regions in North Africa, South Africa, East Africa. You have hubs that are very rich in developers, very rich in energy. We need finance coming in to help work with insurance to make risk profiles to start being able to scale up. But you have to look. You can't do everything. So when you find your objectives, I think it's really important to really down select to where can you be world class, and then you have to look at your regional players. Where can they be world class, and how do you work together to help each other scale up?
Brilliant, Jeffrey. Thank you very much. Sorry, thank you. Nabil Ushuga. Nabil.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Nabil Ushagu. I'm Director of Business Environment and Government Affairs at Huawei Morocco. My work is about strategic engagement on digital infrastructure, public policy, and institutional partnerships. However, my intervention today is I have focused on what the World Bank says about the AI readiness, which is about the forces. Connectivity, competency, context, and computing capacity. In Morocco, connectivity, I think we are on the level where we should be in that aspect. In terms of competency, there is international challenge, and we as a company, we have programs with the government where we work with all universities in Morocco and other partners to do programs of related to digital skills. The context, I think in Morocco we have very clear vision about the Digital Morocco 2030 and AI Morocco. And so what's next challenge is about the computing capacity, which is the data centers. In this sense, there are many projects worldwide that have been gone back to departure point because there is real challenge of digital power, of renewable energy. I think Morocco has a lot of advantage in this sense. So I think this is all related to a big challenge that Morocco is facing, is that Morocco has generated from 2000 to 2024 on average 215,000 fewer jobs per year than needed to maintain stable employment levels. So we have to keep this in mind while going through the digital mapping or digital strategy in Morocco. In terms of investment, the World Bank has highlighted that Morocco maintained investment levels close to 30% of GDP. So I think we have that part that can partly sustain what is needed. And the last thing is about having multiple and diversified partnership. So this is also advantage in Morocco. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nabil. Next up, Mohammed Sakini.
Oh, that's me. I'm coming halfway, right? So, hi everyone. Mohammed Sarghini. I'm CEO of Group of Alliance. I serve also as a director for Higher Education School, and I'm the co-founder of Health Tech Startup. So my day-to-day work is about strategy, it's about education, and about innovation in healthcare and in digital transformation. So I'll take your vision, Levine, because that was very interesting, because we usually start working about AI, about startups, about fintechs and this kind of stuff, but I would love to focus on something different. I would like to focus on sovereignty. What is sovereignty? So we talk about AI, LLMs, cloud, technology, but we forget about the main things that might give sense to all this stuff together, which is the sovereignty of what we're building. So is it a financial issue? For sure. Everything is a financial issue. Whatever you need to build, you need money. Okay? So money we can find if it's bankable. So how can we make a digital adoption and transform this digital adoption to a digital leadership that would make this transformation bankable and then interest financial institutions, public funds, private sector to put money on this sovereignty. So when we think about this, we have two ways of defining this sovereignty. First one, which is the most common one, is say, I can't stand alone. I can do it by myself. I depend on no one, and I can build whatever I need to build. AI, cloud, will need a lot of money, a lot of skills, and a lot of time. I think we have none of these three things. The other way of seeing sovereignty is to see it as a way of defining your dependencies. What would you accept to not control? What would you accept to not manage? So you need to build your vision of your sovereignty around what you need to control. At the end, you need to create value. That should be local value. At the end, you need to create innovation. Better if it's local innovation. You need to control. Better if it's a local regulation. So sovereignty is a mix of all this: technology, skills, regulation, but necessarily a long-term resilience that can make this ecosystem worth, usable, secure, and strategic for a country. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And some important challenges there as well. And actually, you're right, that sort of definition of what sovereignty actually is and what it means, and whether it's achievable is, again, something we can sort of pull up on as we come through. Our next speaker is Mehdi Aloui. Mehdi.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you today. So I would love to focus on my intervention on 3 key points. But before that, I would love to present from where I'm coming. So I'm engineer and working for the last 10 years in the Moroccan startup ecosystem. So I'm managing a tech hub based in Casablanca that work with startup and the youth. So we mainly do 3 things. So we train the next generation of talent in on the field of the future, like EA, cybersecurity, and gaming. We also support, incubate, accelerate startup, and we finance also startup. One of the amazing things that we did during the past year, you may know the famous TV show Shark Tank. So we produced a Moroccan version of Shark Tank that get more than 20 million Moroccans that see at least 1 episode. So to come back to our discussion today, for me there is 3 points that are extremely important in this context and moment. The first one is about infrastructure before the usage. So today we spoke a lot about EA, we spoke a lot about fintech, but to do that we need data center, we need cloud, we need cybersecurity, connectivity, high calculation system to be able to speak about sovereignty. So Morocco have done a lot on that. So today we are building multiple EA data center. There's one in Casablanca, one in Dakhla, and maybe one in the north. So this is a very good news. About connectivity, as Nabil says, I think Morocco is already very good on that, and one of the best countries in Africa. And we are doing also good in cybersecurity, but we need maybe a little bit more. So sovereignty is based on that. The second point is talent. So we need to train massively talent, and today we have the chance to have the Moroccan strategy 2030 of digital, with the ambition to train more than 240,000 youth on digital technology by 2030. So this is very good, and having talent will help, corporate company, to come from abroad and to be established in Morocco, and also to serve the local company here in Morocco. And the last thing is how we can use fintech as a tool of inclusion. So as Maël said before, fintech is one of the most important kind of startup. Usually we say it's a locomotive of the startup, because every startup to exist need to charge their client. So this is why fintech is so important. And today we have many fintech in Morocco. There's Shari, there is Wafer, and many others that are doing very well today. The path was very complicated, but today with the Central Bank of Morocco, so they opened the fintech center that will help more and more startups on that. One of the things that I believe that can create more and more growth is to see how this fintech ecosystem can enlarge the opportunity, for other startups. They can enlarge opportunity for the citizen and create more inclusion, thanks to financial inclusion that we want to do in Morocco. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mehdi. Mustafa Sohini.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I think everybody said, I have the privilege to be the last one, I think, right? One more, okay. So I can still add some more values around that. Maybe my background, actually, I work for, I work and do some research with the International Research Center of AI under the auspice of UNESCO in Slovenia. We work in capacity building, specifically in AI since 2018 in schools, specifically we focused on 15 to 18 years old. So we started very early around, and like Singapore, very much about the mindset first, right? Are we solving for the right problem and so on, before actually the technology. That was really an important part. I've been in Fintech. We built Fintech, mobile money for a long time. And so in the crossing all of that, I wanted to give maybe a couple of perspectives. And I like the starting with the definition of sovereignty. Yes, because we talk about sovereignty, digital sovereignty in particular, but actually, are we just upgrading really our digital capacity? So is it, are we talking just about upgrading Africa digital dependency specifically? And sovereignty is not in isolation. And I wanted to give maybe 2 or 3 examples of where we're involved in that. So it's not in isolation, it's not just all or nothing, right? It's partnership, but we need to be able to understand what is critical for our own environment, and every single environment is very specific. And so I wanted to give maybe 2 or 3 points. One, we said connectivity. Well, connectivity does not equal competitiveness. We've been a lot working on access, and across Africa, not just in Morocco, access to internet, access to mobile, access to digital payments, access to platform. But at the end, who captures the value? And I think this is where we need to start about new use cases, right? Because clearly the supercomputers are very rare in our continent. The algorithm and the machine learning are already, there's a lot of intensive investment to be done for that. So local value is important, and we see a lot of things around dialects, unwritten dialects. We see a lot of use cases from Madagascar to Morocco. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and I think this is a question that we need to ask ourselves. Who own the infrastructure, but actually own the data? Which data do we need to own, right? Who build the companies, where the high-value jobs are created, and so on. And I think therefore access to value is an important aspect. I have the privilege also to work as a consultant for the government of Madagascar at the moment, and so in helping to define some of these strategic challenges around ICT. And just to give you some numbers, it's the ICT sector is only around 1.5 to 1.7% of the GDP. So this is more greenfield, and therefore how do we move from there where we have nothing, as opposed to Morocco or South Africa, to a place where we need to be competitive. So we can't have the same infrastructure, we can't have all of that, but therefore we need to be smart around the job creation. We need to be smart about the sequence of the bankable project and what we're looking for. So we can't just go for a big data center first. Maybe we need to we're looking, already a lot of things happening around the BPO and KPO and so on. Fintech to be actually, in this case, a medium, right, to formalize some flows, building regulatory sandbox, and then prepare for much heavier access and things. So when we talk about Africa specifically, right, there's a big disparity between Madagascar and South Africa, where I spent half of my life, or I'm still based there. And so, yes, talents is everywhere, and I appreciate a lot of people here are working on talents, and I came just now from Oujda, by the way, 500 youth working on the 3 days hackathon, amazing project, some of them in health tech, so I invite you to go and check what they are. But the challenge also is that, yes, we're building AI capacity, but what's the pathway to income? Because ultimately, that's a real challenge, right? What's the pathway to income? How do we generate not just jobs, how do we generate that income? Maybe local, maybe not local. How do we export our capacity, right? While staying in the country, which is in the countries, which is one of the challenge. Regulation, another point. South Africa, I don't know if you've seen recently, there's 2 things happening in South Africa in the last 6 months. One of them is, first of all, 512 crypto asset services being provided a license application. It's incredible. This is really a big turning point, right? But on the same time, we're part of that. There was a regulation on AI policy, right? Just in April, and that regulation was taken back, right? Was removed because the person that wrote the regulation used some LLM or some agent or LLM tools, right? We created some kind of sources that were not existing, and that's completely create a big distrust or mistrust into this policy. So the question here is that regulation need to be an advantage and not just and maybe the signal that we see from South Africa is not just an advantage, it's a warning around how we're doing that. And then finally, I mean, just to because really talent is the core for us, and we're involved in a lot of like I said, whether we work with SMEs or youth across the continent. We can't have actually digital infrastructure without the talent, and I think for me is really where one of the focus. Of course, we can't focus on everything, but one of the focus is actually how do we keep some talent here? How do we and how do we participate in creating some of this value, and specifically in research? Because one of the challenges across from here from Mehdi, right, working on startups here, is that we lack across the continent is a spin-off from the universities to startup, right? And this is a policy issue, this is a regulation issue, this is a mindset issue, this is a lot of different perspectives. But but this is one way also for us to be able to create some kind of very innovative way to work around this path of infrastructure that we don't have, policy that we don't have, and everything. And this is maybe the biggest challenge I think that we have: talent and university in our continent. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Excuse me. And our last panelist is Innocent Ashira.
Hi everyone, my name is Innocent Isiche. I'm the CEO of ACIA Associates, we're based out of Nigeria. So we're a policy advisory firm, but today we support some of the leading fintechs that have come out of Nigeria, two of which are unicorns. And I think my conversation here today is just to build up on what we have seen so far, particularly in the fintech ecosystem. So for those of you who may not know much about Nigeria, roughly about 200 million people. And I think a lot is said about what has happened in Kenya, but if you look at innovation around payments, I think Nigeria holds a very big ace in that space. One of which a key factor that had driven it is really around the policy framework that Nigeria adopted around interoperability. So that helped to create what I would say a good number of, allowing a lot of startups to plug into the system without having to build their own infrastructure from end to end. And so that helped to encourage innovations around payments, around savings, and even in case of lending, reaching the last mile. So today, maybe about 5-6 years ago, like 4 years ago, you probably had maybe 3-4 billion transaction counts in a year in Nigeria. Today, you have roughly 16 to 18 billion transaction counts. I think this year probably be more than that, and that reflects the sort of the depth of innovation that we've seen, whereby some entities today have, for example, have close to 40 million retail customers that are helping to support payment transactions, and this includes capturing the informal segment of the market, which is really around, which has helped to really drive inclusion in Nigeria. A lot of it has also been driven by engagement between the regulators and the practitioners, where they're able to have learning sessions and share their knowledge on what could be done to continue to to support innovation, whether it's through the regulatory sandbox, whether it's through how do you address, because as you begin to take advantage of technology, there are emerging issues which come up, whether it's on ML, whether it's on ML CFT, or whether it's on KYC related issues of fraud, which is actually becoming quite prominent now. So having those sort of engagements to continue to build that trust in the system, I think, has been one of the key areas that we have also provided support to ensure that some of these key issues have been addressed. And when it comes to the fintechs, one of the things beyond the domestic payments where we've seen huge progress, but we've also seen growth in areas around wealth management. So one of our clients actually has roughly 7 million Nigerians that are saving and investing on their platform today. And I think it just speaks to the sort of innovation that we've seen in this space. Another aspect I think has really been around cross-border payments, particularly remittances. Nigeria is one of the biggest recipients of remittances on the continent, roughly slightly over $22 billion. And what we have seen is that you've seen the fintechs have actually become the major players, as opposed to the traditional entities that you saw in the past, like maybe a Western Union or a MoneyGram. You've seen the likes of, actually a good number of these entities are actually Nigerian-founded entities, right? That are helping to make it easier for people to send money to Nigeria, right? And so that has, and a good number of them, when you look at the evaluations today, if you look at the charts of companies that have received funding in Africa, fintechs that received funding in Africa, last year, a good proportion of the large ticket sizes actually came to some of the remittance companies and payment companies in Nigeria. But despite this, one of the things which we have seen is really beyond the fact that we've seen growth in this space, particularly around payments. One of the key areas that are emerging is really around cross-border within the continent. The costs are still relatively high. And I know there have been areas, conversations around PAPs. There's also been a conversation, I think somebody brought it up, is really how you also look building stablecoin frameworks, because the idea is that it could reduce the cost of moving funds within the continent. But right now, what we're seeing, that frameworks are being developed, whether in Kenya, whether in Ghana, and even in Nigeria. And what's the appropriate way to actually build the right stablecoin framework or the right payment rails, particularly through PAPs, that would not come as a significant cost to like monetary sovereignty. I think there have been questions around what are the implications that it will have on even the FX market in general. So those are some of the conversations that we're seeing, and that I think could, depend on how it's done, could help to, reduce the cost of payments within the region. For example, just not to digress, but we had, particularly if you look at the impact of the Iran crisis in Africa, one of the things that we've seen that Nigeria has been somewhat insulated because of the refinery, one of the largest refinery in Africa, the Dangote refinery, which has really, and because of what we've seen around the Strait of Hormuz, you've seen a good number of African countries that have been affected by the crisis, whether in Kenya, whether in South Africa. You look at the inflation rates. But one of the things, so you've seen these countries coming to Nigeria to see how they could procure some of their petroleum needs. But one of the things you also ask is, how do they pay? What's the cost of payment, right? So really thinking about how we can actually reduce the cost. It's actually probably cheaper to pay from Europe to Africa than from South Africa to Nigeria. So I think really looking at how we can actually work to reduce some of these cost elements, I think certainly looking forward to the conversation here today. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Innocent. Now, I promise to come to the audience straight away. So are there any questions that people already have? Gentleman at the end, and then the lady there. I think if you've got speakers, I think, so, or microphones. If not, there might be a microphone. If not, microphone. I'll do them in batches. I'll start with you two first, if that's okay, and then. You might have to shout. Apologies.
This one is working. Here.
Okay, thank you. The transition of personal information from the state to the individual for seamless KYC and AML for international banking. Because sometimes you have barriers in frontiers that should no longer exist. So if I'm banking with fintech and I'm banking and I move as a diplomat from one place to the other, why do I have to go through the same motions again and again? The whole point of fintech and digital currencies is to make things easier for the consumer and for that ease to bank the unbanked. So, I mean, I feel there's a disconnect between legacy systems that, okay, I have to bring this paper and prove that I exist and prove that I have this and prove that I have that, instead of just putting all that information in one, centralized place where anybody can access it with my permission. Okay, I'm going to this bank. My, biometrics, and there you go. There's all my information. First question. Second question is because we've been speaking about AI. And I believe that there's a very big responsibility behind AI, which is if AI uses the information that is going around and given the misinformation, so how do we, structure that it's using the reliable information, and who is making the decision? Is it the AI or the human behind the AI? I mean, we look at films all over. I mean, I don't want to go into all the films that iRobot, T2, all of these things that are possible. And we see these, I mean, everybody looks at Star Trek. Now it's like, hey, we have all that. So we should.
Okay,
and my last question is for the transition. I think it goes through the first question, the transition from the legacy systems to the new systems, okay?
Brilliant. Lady over there, and then I'll get the panel. And panel, as you're thinking about your responses, I think rather than everybody answering all the questions, just pick the ones that you like the sound of and most relevant to your background, I think is the way, because we've got about half an hour for discussion, so just to keep it all nice and short and snappy.
Yes. So far, I mean, we talked about the use of AI, especially in the financial sector, but I think that there's also more and more an importance to see how that AI can be used also in terms of institutional communications. Because, so I represent Majority Agency. We came from Brussels here. Some of our clients are main institutional bodies and governments. And one thing that it's becoming more and more critical to understand is to, and I had to write the question because a lot of insights were shared, is to what are the suggestions you would give when your assets are limited by constraints of policy bottlenecks? Because to quote Mr. Levine, he said to use your assets, but how can you use your assets in the landscape of institutional communication when they are the ones actually creating the bottlenecks? So because to quote some of the questions that we got from some of our clients, which are institutional bodies, is how can AI be used in a compliant way to scale all that is communication from a standpoint of government to government, but also government to business and government to citizens? Yeah, thank
Brilliant.
you.
Thank you. And those that indicated that I'll come back. I think I'll take some and then I'll come back to other questions in a second. So I look for panelists to wave at me or just simply put their lights on probably, and whoever's quickest off the button. Jeff.
I'll speak maybe to some of the AI, just some feedback. I think on the second question and then the last question, maybe kind of merge them together. So one, when you're looking at AI, I think something we have to get away from is what Hollywood or the movies are making AI out to be, to what it really is. I mean, it's the next evolution of compute. The way AI functions and the way we see it in movies, they're two very separate things. And so frankly, I think part of the problems here when you get to policy, whether that policy is in fintech or if it's in other government institutions, you have to work with the users, right? You have to really identify what your objective is. So we're kind of blanketing, there's like, you're looking at the beginning of infinity at any direction with AI because now you can do anything, right? You don't have to be a programmer or developer. You can go to the AI and now AI will teach you how to become a developer. AI will program for you. So right now we're going into multimodal AI, meaning I can speak from English to French, from French to Arabic. From Arabic, I can go to C++, C++ to Python, into genomics, right? So everything becomes a language. And back to the idea of, okay, well, we need a focus because you just can't do everything. And back to the question about policy, Europe has problems, right? Because the European Union wants to be a main competitor for AI and saying, okay, in 2 years, we're going to be one of the top competitors in AI, but we have policy where it takes 3 years to get approval to bring up energy or to bring up new infrastructure. So your own policies working against you. So that's where I see public-private partnerships really work. In Sweden, the Wallenberg Foundation, they really led the case. That's what started us with this Family Office Alliance. We needed private equity to lead the way. And I think governments move slow by nature. So governments have to find, and I don't think they're going to be the leaders. I think you really need the family offices, the private equity to step up and be the leaders in putting in the foundation. And you have to find partners in the region. If you have policy in your region or limited resources, I mean, obviously, no one wants to import intelligence. Everyone wants to export, but the reality is there's going to be importers and exporters. And part of this will be monetized, which is a part of the fintech area. But I would highly recommend when it comes to, when you have policy you're trying to work around and you have your objectives, that you really get to your sovereign objectives. What is it that you need to do? Right? You could do everything, but maybe it's your ports, for instance. So we want to improve our ports. So you have to define that objective. Maybe it's your security. Maybe it's your economic possibility frontier. You want more AI natives. But you have to get very precise on what your sovereign objectives are. Then you have to look at a workflow inside of that area. So if it's your ports, maybe it's trade and commerce. Maybe it's port security. And under that, you have to really define, well, what's your use case in there? And that use case might be different workflows from a chip perspective from AI. It might be high resolution weather data. It could be render engines. It could be machine learning, right? And that dictates what compute you need. So trying to get to the bottom of the stack is what people are doing now is they're just racing to auction. I want to scale up. I'm going to put in the latest architecture. But really, if you define what your objectives are and you realize you have the data to meet that objective, where can you be world class? Focus there and then build the best, smallest, the least amount of infrastructure to get the most return. And that's going to be a heterogeneous data center. It's not going to be one architecture. You're going to need different types of accelerators of ASICs, possibly quantum, different types of chip manufacturers. But you can't get there until you really define what it is you're doing and why you're doing it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tiffany. And yes, so definitions around policy. Innocent.
Hi, in response to the question regarding ML, KYC, so one of the things we've seen, I think, particularly around cross-border, which is very different in Europe. Like in Europe, like an example, like maybe Revolut started, let's say Lithuania, and is able to provide service in the UK. So what you're seeing that is emerging, it's what do you call like regulatory passporting. So far, we've seen conversations around that between, I think, Ghana and Rwanda. And the idea is just, if you consider it a burden for yourself, consider it a burden for a company that is trying to maintain operations in maybe 5 to 10 different countries in Africa, right? Being able to, like, the reporting requirements, the compliance requirements, or the licensing requirements. So the idea, I think, it's become obvious that this has become to reduce the cost of, transactions within Africa. You then have to begin to look at what sort of framework can you build that's also acceptable by countries, and you could even start within the region. So let's say within the East Africa region, or within SADC in Southern Africa, or ECOWAS, where you can begin to have some sort of regulatory passport. So as a company, you don't necessarily need to worry about having 6 different compliance officers reporting to 6 different countries. I hope that sort of answers your question. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you.
There was 2 bunch of questions, but I think there's mainly two areas there. So first one is about AI. So please, guys, make no fool about AI. It's not a magic tool. It's still learning, still improving. We have a lot of infrastructure bottlenecks. We have a lot of modeling bottlenecks. We had a lot of false trust. South Africa can experience this with the law that they just pulled out because AI just built an imaginary reference on something that should rule AI. So AI has a lot of challenges still, right? It cannot solve everything, but will depend on 2 things. It will depend on technology improvement. So engineers are working on this across all the stack. But we have also the regulation part, which is for me, more important than technology. Because technology, we will come up to discoveries, we will explore, we will build things, we build stuff. I mean, it's human. Regulation is strategic. So you're talking about AML, KYC, a lot of cross-boarding, this kind of things. I think this is mainly regulation, not technology. It's about people being around the table and discussing about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. It's about a pool of countries that may define policies, common policies that may open borders for each citizen in this area. Just a small experience in the UAE, they built something amazing, just on a country level. So there are 5, 6 states, right? But they've built something amazing just by harmonizing the way services are interconnected between them. So in UAE, you define yourself once. You can use it across several services. But this was enabled in the UAE because they were able to gather around the table and discuss about things, how to ease all these services for their citizens. So imagine an African board that would define something that rules all the African countries. So it's not about technology. It's mainly about people thinking or having the same vision.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, go on. You missed the first, and then yeah, go on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all right. Yeah. So yeah, on the KYC, I mean, and regulation, don't forget that basically, specifically in Africa, first of all, we have already regulations around data and personal protection. So AI was just not born like that and nothing happened, right? We have regulation. Specifically, some of it is maybe different from what we see in the East or the West or in the Middle East or else. And Europe, is not an advantage compared to us because in some areas we have actually very well defined. And that comes to your point of KYC, and maybe it's part of this inter-African trade agreement and so on that will resolve it, but ultimately, yes, there are some data there. And come back also to the, I wanted to add maybe just a point on the, you mentioned about the enterprise. Yes, we see worldwide a lot of difficulties to move from POC to enterprise implementations, right? But why? Mostly because when we do an implementation in an enterprise, we need to think about all the different other aspects, cybersecurity, data, compliance, governance, and so on, as a normal project, right? And therefore, yes, and where I differ a little bit maybe with my panelists earlier, there are, however, technologies already available. You don't have to have, as we said, a super, hyper-scale environment to do that. You can do already a lot of things, but that requires a bit of course, of skills. But you can do a lot of things within the laws, within the countries, to do some use cases. But the most important is define your use case. And really, you can do a lot of things at very low cost within your constraints today. And I'm happy to share some examples of how to do that after this. Thanks.
Brilliant. Miranda.
Thank you. I'll touch upon transition from legacy to new systems, and then that relates to a couple of the other questions. I mean, this is an area where we did a lot of work coming from the traditional side. I mean, banking systems, especially on the post-trade, there's still legacy IBM mainframe systems that were built pre-cloud, and anything that we know, that Mr. Levine talks about as well. So really, it's a process, not an event, because those legacy systems are embedded on the core banking side, and they're not going away anytime soon. I mean, every CIO that's tried to do that has failed and then left after 4 years. So, like quarterly annual results are short-term, and these are long-term projects that, as Mr. Levine knows, require a lot of infrastructure investment. So really, the solution in the near term is hybrid. It's a combination of traditional and digital, and we realize that a lot as a market infrastructure firm, because, of course, application program interfaces aren't going away anytime soon. Even some of the most advanced digital asset exchanges like Binance and Kraken still have those, even though they allow movement of assets on public blockchains. We did some transactions yesterday using USDT on Tron, but equally, we were also integrated into, let's say, Kraken's interface to actually trade, whether it's the block desk or the exchange. So really, it's a combination of those tools. But what does that unlock, actually? I mean, for the first time in my 30-year career, I've seen an intersection of digital and traditional finance, because a lot of the activity on the crypto side initially was trading on volatility, not real. You're trading on an index, someone's making money on a bet on that index, whether it's gold or anything else. And then on the real world asset side, I mean, we were speaking about this earlier, just outside the panel, central banks are very conservative. They don't want to use stablecoins. They're scared of FDI outflows or lack of control over monetary policy. Yeah, actually, there's an opportunity to combine the two. So if we look at a practical example, I mean, I can't speak much about communication from that standpoint, but just in terms of commodities trade, a year ago, stablecoins weren't being used and it was unheard of. But now on activities like African gold, whether it's Zambia and other quarters, stablecoin use is increasing. Now, what does that mean in reality in terms of economics? So when you export gold, let's say CIF, so delivery in Dubai or Hong Kong, if you use the banking system, sometimes it can take between 3 to 5, even 7 banking days for payments to settle. With a stablecoin, you can do that at the end of a given day or near real time, whatever you want to do. So all of a sudden, you can go from 2 cycles a month that for trade finance might be financed at 3% a month, with what we're doing, to 4 cycles a month. So you're doubling the yield for investors just by virtue of more efficient movement. And we're seeing this practically play out. It's not just something that's theory. It's massively increasing. I mean, for other reasons, geopolitically as well, usage, because one country's enemy is another country's friend as well. So it was interesting that the Iranians with the Straits of Hormuz were taking payments in renminbi and USDT on Tron as well. But obviously that's got to be processed somewhere. Obviously, if you're worried about being cut off from the US banking system, you wouldn't do it, but someone's doing it out there. So a lot of that is interesting. The other thing, just to touch upon your question too, AI governance. Obviously, the likes of Singapore, I spend a lot of time there. It can't compete with the likes of the US or China in terms of what's happening on the AI front, but it's realized it can become a hub for AI governance. And so there's no global regulation here. Someone's got to be the standard bearer. We mentioned UAE on digital assets. ADGM with the Financial Services Regulatory Authority were one of the first organizations or one of the first countries to adopt a formalized regulated digital asset regime, and others, like we did a lot of work in Seychelles, copied it. So Singapore said, okay, we're going to be an AI governance center, but equally, we're going to become an R&D hub. We're going to sandbox. We're going to let companies come in and trial, and we're going to provide a framework that's safe to be able to adopt, try new technologies, and then scale them. And you made the point about linking to the universities as well. So you're going to see certain countries which aren't necessarily strong on the core technologies themselves create a niche. And I'm a big fan of sandboxes. I mean, even in Seychelles in 2019, we adopted a hybrid approach with digital and traditional assets with exchange tokenization on securities. They didn't have the sandbox rules, but that gave them the data points to allow them to adopt a sandbox, which we also advised on. So I think big proponent of sandboxes as well.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to go at some more questions, but I will come to Mehdi and Nabil first on those, because I realised I haven't had a chance to speak yet. So, gentleman there, first of all, and then the gentleman here. Lots and lots of questions. So, nice and short and sharp if we can, with the time in mind. So, thank you.
I will try. Thank you. Thank you very much for all the panelists. All the insights are very interesting, especially the insight from Ms. Serrini, which touches what I do in my day-to-day. I'm head of business development in a submarine cable company. I work along all the west coast of Africa and then the east coast also. And the question here is that we build what we build as AI, as new technologies, 5G, 6G, 7G, whatever we want. It comes at the end to the physical infrastructure, which is the most basic thing. And then my observation through all the countries where I'm working is that when we come with AI, we come with policies or regulations for AI. But AI to work, it needs an update for the regulations and policies that comes to cover submarine cables, backbones, last mile and everything. We want to promote data centers. We do some framework to promote data centers. But of course, you can invest in a data center in a place, in a country, but then the data center is isolated because the operators are still operating in pricings and investment that have to do with old times. So for example, just to give, I am a business development guy, so I talk in specific terms. You will find, for example, that 1G connection between point A and point B might get to $500,000 a year, which is very outdated. For a data center that is managing terabytes, cannot afford that. This is not a business case for them. So in terms of investment, what I observed that some countries are very dynamic, like Nigeria, like South Africa. Even in terms of submarine cables, when we are landing there, we don't worry. We know that it is very clear. We go, we land, we find an operator, and we operate. So we separate which is the physical infrastructure to come. These countries invites the infrastructure to come, and then to operate it is a different question. But in other countries, it is related. If you are not an operator, you cannot come with the infrastructure. So you cannot anticipate the market. Then the market gets a boom, and the infrastructure is not there. So this is one of the things. And then in countries that are not attractive to international investment, private investment, most likely government drive this investment and go to make the infrastructure available for all the operators of the country in equal part. So no one is out of the game. Then, sorry, I took a long time, just 1 minute. So sovereignty, security, that should go into groups of interest regionally. Some treaties and international conventions are very outdated, and countries should be aware of that so that they can work together to come to an agreement regionally. For example, West Africa, East Africa, North Africa, something like that. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. Gentleman there with a question, I think. Yeah, one here. Ooh, 1, 2, 3. Might get 4, but as long as everybody's really, really quick. Yeah, quick questions, quick answers.
Oui, bonjour. Je préfère le faire en français qu'en anglais parce qu'en anglais n'est pas très clair. Donc, moi, Amadeus Institute, président de l'association CNIZ. Justement, on est en train d'accompagner la transformation qui se passe au niveau du cinéma classique. C'est-à-dire, on est à Warzazat, c'est le lieu emblématique des tournages des films, avec la production classique. Et maintenant, il y a avec l'IA, avec les transformations digitales et tout ça, nous sommes en train de lancer un projet structurant, c'est-à-dire transformer tout ça en ville intelligente du cinéma. Et puis, on prépare un forum international de cinéma, intelligence artificielle et investissement, encouragé et soutenu justement par l'AIN Africa, que M. Zaouni Mustafa, je le remercie beaucoup. Et maintenant, la question justement, c'est comment donc accompagner ces transformations dans la créativité, dans le cinéma, et voilà, comment, et dans quel cadre, avec quelle éthique, quelles conditions, parce que vraiment, on est en train plutôt on préfère donc ne pas la subir, plutôt d'accompagner, former les gens, et voilà. Donc, on veut savoir juste votre avis sur ces transformations dans le domaine du cinéma.
Thank you. Lady there.
Can you hear me? Okay. So thank you for all the panelists. I just have a question about the cryptocurrency. Is it an effective solution in fintech and all this stuff? And if not, how we can transform it to a reliable currency?
That's sort of a nice, sharp, short question we like. Right, we had one over there, and the lady there, and then I might have to call it because we definitely, but I will start with the guys at the end in reply.
Okay, thank you very much for the panelists present here. Thank you also very much for giving us the floor to actually ask our questions. So I'm the founder of Civic Behavior Lab, which is a platform for behavioral scientists. and for public policy. So we apply behavioral sciences for public policy because we believe that policy impact really doesn't really have any importance if it doesn't go through the people and through the citizens and the actors that are actually involved in the process of policy making and making things operational, like was said before. So my question is about the policy aspect of AI. We said earlier that there are policies about AI, and then there are policies that make policies about AI work. So different types of policies. And I personally agree with you with what you said. I think we need ministerial governance and also convergence of the policies at hand, because if we want to make the AI policies effective, we need to go through other sectors so that we can avoid the resistance, which is an important flaw in the process of policy making, so that we can actually get to the game theory results, which is going from point A to point B and actually, of course, result in the causal mechanism that's going to make us reach our objectives. So my question here is, what are the non-negotiables of people who work in AI so that they can collaborate with government and also ministries in order to achieve this convergence, so that we can make both AI policies work and also make the resistance less of a flaw? Thank you.
Okay, hello.
Fabulous, thank you. Yeah, jump in there.
Yeah, two very simple questions. Number one, isn't the AI race already over? Why do I say that? Why do I ask that? Because if you take off the application layer, you're left with the energy layer and the compute layer. The energy layer is already cornered. The trend is very clear. Everyone knows China corners the energy layer. And the compute is built on the energy layer. Of course, we're talking about the chips. So the data centers and the chips, they require energy first and foremost. Everything else is secondary. So isn't the AI race already over? Because right now we're all scrambling for the scraps. This is the way I see it. Second question is regarding the ethics of AI. I'm not talking about Terminator, which is also a real possibility. I'm talking about the applications of AI in military and surveillance systems. This scares the bejesus out of me, because we see it happening today. AI is like Pandora's box. We opened it, we didn't read the instruction manual, and we just ran with it, and now everyone is trying to monetize it without any concern with how is it going to be monetized, or why, or if it should be monetized in those spheres, namely surveillance and military. Thank you.
Well, we'll get around the answers quicker because we've got less panelists. So, who wants to go first?
Okay, maybe I'll this last one about the AI race being over, I fundamentally disagree. I believe it is barely getting started. The amount of energy that exists on the Earth, that exists in this continent, you know, if you go a little bit further south, you have the Ingra River Network. It's a prize jewel of the world, right? The strongest hydroelectric potential upbringing the world has to offer. Namibia has really maybe the second largest uranium mine in the world. They also have the #1 solar profile in the world. That there's no solar there yet. So when you look to renewables, Africa is a gold mine, literally. And then if you go a little bit further, you know, we have our sun where we collect solar. But if you look a little bit deeper into the core of the Earth, that's our second sun. Barely tapped into. China is the #1 at bringing up geothermal. Africa, if you look at the Ethiopian, East African Rip down in Kenya, that's one of the strongest geothermal profiles in the world. The Microsoft deal didn't go through. Maybe El Salvador, they have one of the largest geothermal profiles in the world. But you know, geothermal technology is just bringing up. You know, fusion's coming online. They're putting accelerators to bring nuclear quicker. So I would agree there are leaders in the race, and it's very hard to catch up to the leader, but it comes down to the bankable assets. You know, and the point earlier is just because you have the resources, what China does well is that they allow to bring up the resources very quickly. Problematically, though, what's the policy around it? What's the global policy? Because some of those resources are being powered by unsustainable fuel and energy. So I think the countries that are ahead of the curve that are bringing up renewables, bringing up clean energy, those will be the long-term winners. Countries that are banking on dirty fuel that's not helping out humanity, I don't think they're going to keep a leadership position.
Brilliant, good challenge back.
Yeah, just a point to make there. I mean, I call it the AI resource loop because energy is one critical component, and obviously made your comments around China. The other one is that Mr. Levine touched upon critical minerals and rare earth elements, whether it's the chips, the magnetics. And there, yeah, China's way ahead. It's been a 30-year strategic move by the Chinese. I mean, I'm speaking about that this afternoon, that very topic. But other countries are fighting back. The US has got a policy now with Africa. And just to touch upon stats for potential, approximately 30% of the world's critical minerals reside here on this continent. Yet in terms of mining capabilities, about 0.5% of that, if that rounded up, is being mined. And also now, a lot of these countries that have sold those assets too cheaply because they just get exported at a fraction of the cost, to realize value-added processing on the ground and creating industry is really, really important. That's not just happening in Africa. You know, there's new governments in Bolivia. El Salvador's being mentioned as well, which is also home to Tether as a stablecoin issuer, as an aside. But there's a big AI data center strategy there that the government wants to drive. Obviously, investment's key to all of this. But as Mr. Levine said, when you can package that into yield-bearing assets that have real offtake, that genuinely creates value. And now there's investment opportunities, not on just the traditional side, whether you look at the stock exchange in Casablanca or international markets. There's also distribution and yield capabilities and interest on the digital asset side, where there's billions and billions of dollars of stable coins that are getting no return. And central banks are usually, going back to your question, scared of these things because they think FDI is going to flow out. But actually, if used wisely, it can be a mechanism to massively increase FDI and empower investment and then create local growth.
Innocent.
Just to build on this point, I think maybe coming from where I sit with regards to cryptocurrencies. So if you take a look at, let me use an example. In Nigeria, right, we just looking at the data, our biggest trading partner is China, right? Roughly about maybe $24 billion, right? But when you look at the data that is reported between both countries, there's a discrepancy, roughly about $12 billion. Some of that passes through stable coins, right? Because it's usually cheaper. So if you want to send money from Morocco to Nigeria, you might go through 4 channels using SWIFT. Through your correspondent bank, my correspondent bank, and my local bank in Nigeria, right? So anything that happens along those lines could affect the transaction. Now with stable coins, you sort of take that out, right? You sort of take those correspondent banks. So you now have, it's much faster as long as you have a liquidity provider. But the question folks have, I think central banks, which he sort of speaks to, is really around, you could also have bad actors using it, right?
It's gold. Okay?
What's that?
Because this is the issue, because I know that the currency should have this exchange part, la contrepartie in gold. Okay? So like I really don't understand this.
So it depends on what your reserves are, right? Okay. So the idea is the stable coin is backed by an asset, a redeemable asset, right? Okay. Right? So the same way the stable coin could be backed by US dollars, right? It could also be backed by gold, right? Yeah. So you do find, and I think he spoke a little bit about it, you do find that. The idea is that when it comes to redemption, if I bring that stable coin and I want to get redeemed based on your reserves, I should be able to get that.
This is nice. It's still a solution. Thank you.
Comment. I mean, some of the stablecoin operators like Tether have realized that, so they've introduced Tether Gold as well to asset back, not just with dollars. Actually, most of their backing is US Treasuries at the moment. 95% of that $140 billion reserve, but they're using gold, but not just gold, assets, real-world assets with cash flows. So they've invested into Argentinian agri companies, Canadian-listed companies that provide yield from mining as well, royalties from mining. So the key here is substance, right? As you rightly said. So there's been a lot of pump and dump, whether it's meme coins and other things, but we're seeing the market move towards substance. And investor protection in all of this is really, really important. I mean, he used to work at a central bank as well, so he knows more than many about this. But I think we're at an inflection point now where we're genuinely seeing utility from these types of assets, but there's still more to be done in terms of governance and regulation.
So I think crypto, you had some discussions. There is the ethics. So is the AI race over? Definitely not. I completely join Mr. Levine on this. There is a role to play, different role to play, but definitely we need to play a role there. Otherwise, it's almost done for us. Then you talk about ethics. That's probably the same question with the policy. So I have this funny story that, you know, that the Peace Prize of Nobel, who gave it? Alfred Nobel. What was the original story of that? Dynamite. So he created dynamite because he wanted to build roads. Then dynamite has been used for arms. It's the same stuff for AI. AI is a tool. So we cannot think about AI as ethic or non-ethic. AI is AI. You make it whatever you want to make it. So if you have AI developers that are a round table that would help creating regulation, building policies, they are lobbying, they're not building. So this answers your question. But definitely we need to build some neutral regulation that would be specific almost to every country. Nigerian needs are different from the UAE ones, are different from the Moroccan ones, are different from the American ones, because there is a legacy, there is history, there is digital adoption, there is different cultures and this kind of stuff. So AI remains a tool, not a magic tool, an evolving tool that needs infrastructure, needs energy, needs clouds, needs connection, needs brains. But at the end, they need more regulation. And everything is regulated. AI should be as well regulated.
Brilliant, thank you. Mustafa.
Yeah, just, I mean, first of all, on the race, yes, it's happening. Yes, it's happening. Specifically, where are we, us in Africa, or even in Europe, by the way. Specifically, I will look at it not just from that perspective of energy, of course, and data centers, but also on research, right? And this is probably, like I said, the biggest challenge right now, and China is probably even overtaken the US in terms of publication as we speak. However, the value chain is very big, right? Yesterday the race was on the phones, inside the devices. Today we are, you know, it's a race about super apps and even not even super apps, even users and influencers and so on, right? So in terms of architecture, today we have capabilities to build things without using this, using some small kind of architecture, more adapted, and it's gonna go faster and faster and faster. Open source is, I'm a strong believer in that space for spaces where we have constraints, right? The gentleman there mentioned the challenges of cable. You know, like I said, I'm working also in Madagascar. The challenge of a data center, the constraint, the digital divide will only be bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So to wrap it up, and this is my initial point, right? Yes, ethics, but ethics come back to, you know, education, right? You cannot build policies without having to link it up to different people holistically involved in it, and it's all come back to all of us to be participating in learning, data governance, learning about what we can do with this data, right? And, you know, if I ask you a simple question, who has just a VPN and antivirus on the phone here, and you'll probably have almost nobody, right? So we need to be conscious around that before actually, I mean, you know, before we build the regulation, all of us need to be conscious about our own data and what we can do with our own data, and then hopefully we can be creative around that. And come back to the point of the new opportunities, right? We have new opportunities, right? So AI film, you know, building AI films, right? Earlier everybody was watching the film, but actually you can build your own film, right, today with AI, right? And so that's also a new job, new opportunity that's gonna be created, and we need to be able to define what is our advantage as a community, region, country, continent, and so on, to say what, and where I agree with Mr. Levine, right? The use case here is going to be very important. You can't be doing everything. So you just need to choose where is your strengths and try to focus on that and be, to repeat what he just said, to be actually the expert in that area. Thank you.
One very quick last point, very quick.
Okay, yeah, we're going to make this fairly quick, but on regulation, something that comes to mind in financial services, I'll talk a little bit fast. I think about credit default swaps, the housing crisis that happened, back in the 2000s. A big problem there was you had the banks who have all the money. They can hire the smartest mathematicians out of MIT or whoever the university is. They can force that algorithm that no one from the standards ratings can disprove wrong in 30 days. And then you have even lower level with the US government, right? So the concern I have when it comes to regulation from a government perspective is, I would say in financial services, it's very important that governments can outcompute the market, because the same problem can happen where you can find AI algorithms that can be programmed to force algorithms and packages through the market that are not sound.
Thank you. I think that brings us back to issues around regulation, which is probably where we started as well. Apologies, we've slightly run over our time, so I will wrap things up there. And sorry for those I didn't get a chance to ask their questions either. A couple of thank yous to the Amadeus Institute, the King, yourselves for your participation, because this is your session. So thank you very much for that. And I'd just like to finish by saying thank you to the panel. That was brilliant. I learned so much, and we could have gone on for hours if we'd have had the time. So thank you all. Thank you for participating.
And thank you for the moderator also.
Thank you.
I think that's it. We can take a picture, I think. Yeah.